the Evaluation Sciences Unit. Thank you. And I am super excited to be hosting our SMCI lecture today. I think we have a few announcements before our speaker, and then for those of you who are joining us for the first time, we have a lecture and then spend a lot of the time in conversation. So I would just encourage you, as you have questions or thoughts along the way, to put them in the chat, and then we'll get a chance to chat more with Dr. Sara Singer at the end. We have three main announcements. Sam, do you want to start with the first one?
Yes. So today I just extended the deadline for the SMCI Publication Award. Please submit all your publications related to improvement at the link that is just being put in the chat. Would love to consider your publication for one of our four best improvement publication awards focused on either adult populations, pediatric populations, healthcare workers, or first authored by a trainee. So please take time to submit your papers today.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sam. Other opportunities. So the SMCI, the Stanford Medicine Center for Improvement, Lilly and Donnelly seed grants are open. Again, this is another round. I think the second round with a deadline in January. I'll put a link, or Selena and I can thumb wrestle, whoever gets to it first can put a link and the deadline in the chat. I don't want to say the wrong date, but it's later in January. And then our final announcement, we'll be taking a break next week for Thanksgiving, and we'll hopefully see you again November 28th. Paul Helgerson will be joining us, and we'd love to see you all there. So any other announcements before we get started? Well, if you think of anything else, please drop it in the chat. I am so pleased to be introducing Dr. Sara Singer, MBA, PhD. She's a professor of medicine, and also, oh great, that's information about the grant, and also a professor of organizational behavior in the Stanford Graduate School of Business. She was just telling us before everyone got on that what's taking up a lot of her time right now is being the interim faculty director and director of research for the Stanford's Distinguished Careers Institute. Not sure that that's what she'll be talking about so much today, but she's talking about the science of teams. Other accolades for her, the science of team science, excuse me. Other accolades for her, she is the Associate Director of Clinical Excellence research for the Research Center in the Department of Medicine. She's Faculty Director of the Health Leadership, Innovation, and Organizations Lab in the Division of Primary Care and Population Health. She has a long career in teams, organizations, system designs, and dynamics, and I just love to hear from her and get the chance to collaborate with her when I can. She's published more than 275 articles in academic journals and books, and I'm really excited for us to hear from her. So Sara, Dr. Singer, I'll let you take it from there.
Thanks so much, Katie. I guess relevant to this group, I think I am a co-chair with Steve Ash for the SMCI ERPG group, the Evaluation Publication Research Group. So I am delighted to be here, and I am delighted I'm hoping this is a bit less of a lecture and more of a conversation if we can make it that, but I did want to share a little bit about what I know around the science of team science, and I am building on the Department of Medicine's initiative around team science, because I know there's a big push around that, and I sit on the steering committee for that group. So also wanted to encourage people to apply for the Lilly and Donnelly grant awards, and look forward to seeing those applications. So I'm going to share a bit about the science of team science and begin with a definition of what I mean by that, but also encourage people to interrupt me if you like as we go. So this draws from the NIH definition from 2010, a basic definition of team science as a collaborative effort to address a scientific challenge that leverages the strengths and expertise of professionals trained in different fields. Things to note about that: we're focusing on science. We're focusing on leveraging strengths and expertise of professionals trained in different fields. And why that's of interest to me personally is because, as someone who comes from the field of organizational behavior, I focus on finding ways to leverage the strengths and expertise of professionals trained in different fields in lots of different teams, and have devoted my career to trying to do that around healthcare topics. And so these teams that are focusing on scientific challenges is a kind of next iteration of that for me. Many of you may have seen this or been involved with the development of a working definition from the Department of Medicine, but just to get everybody on the same page, I thought I'd share it. So last year or earlier this year, we had a meeting where this was proposed, a collaborative effort led by the Department of Medicine investigators to address challenging scientific questions which impact human health and leverage the strengths and expertise of professionals trained in different fields. So you can see it builds on that NIH definition, but the hope is from the Department of Medicine, a big push toward team science. That's the invitation to talk with you about this topic today. And I think I do bring a bit of a unique perspective because I'm more interested in the science of teams than team science per se, but I think it's really helpful to think about the distinction and to think about the ways that the science of teams can actually be helpful in doing good team science. So if you take a look at the visual on the right-hand side, the basic idea is think of team science as this collaborative interdisciplinary effort to advance science in some way, and the science of teams as being a rigorous evidence-based field of management that examines how to perform and lead teamwork generally, and can be, and the idea is that science of teams can be applied to team science projects in ways that develop the ability to do that better. So that's the basic idea of the presentation today. I also wanted to fit it into my field a little bit because I'm going to use the time we have to do a very quick description of some of the important aspects of organizational behavior that I think apply here. So the science of teams is one element of organizational behavior. Generally, organizational behavior is kind of focused on understanding how people interact personally, in groups and in organizations. It focuses on questions of why and how, as opposed to whether. Often in science, we try to understand whether something works, and organizational behavior is really more about how and why, and about what leaders can do to encourage our ability to accomplish what we set out to do in our groups. So that's the basic idea. I'm going to start again with an elemental definition around, what is a team? So here, 4 different ways of important aspects of thinking about it. So one, it's bounded. This is the classic definition of a team, and I give you my crew team from Princeton University as a quintessential example. So typically, we define a team as a group that is bounded and that is stable, and that where the people on the team and the work of the team is interdependent, and where the team shares a common purpose. I will start out this conversation by saying we in healthcare very rarely have these conditions. We are often not bounded as groups. Sometimes we have core members of a team and peripheral members of a team, but it's very often not bounded in ways that a traditional team like a crew team would be. It's often not stable. Members are coming and going and being replaced. The work should be interdependent, and there should be a common purpose, although depending on who's on the groups, they may have different purposes as well. So I put that out there to say that we are working with teams that are often very complex and don't meet the classic definition, and so have different properties. We're still going to try and learn from them, and this is a classic kind of way of thinking about teams of teams, which is basically what team science projects tend to be made up of. This I'm just going to use as a basic framework to take you through some of the elemental aspects of organizational behavior that apply to team science. The general idea is that you've got this system of teams in the middle, and everybody has to work together in order to accomplish the goal of the team. You have inputs, though, a whole variety of different inputs that go in that shape the ability of the team to achieve its outcomes. You have a group of mediators that will, along the way, influence the work of the team. And then you have outputs. And classically, just to draw your attention to that, initially to say that goal achievement is only one important output of a team when you think about kind of the science of teams, because we're also interested in the ability of teams and systems to learn, and we're interested to learn to be better at doing teamwork and team science, and we're interested in the members of the team learning as individuals and growing as individuals and professionals. So important to think about the output of the team and what is team effectiveness in a more in a broader kind of way. So starting you off with that, and then what I want to do is just sort of go through this model a little bit. Inputs include things like how complex and the size of the system. It includes team diversity, diversity in terms of cultural diversity, geographic diversity, functional diversity, et cetera, as well as the various goals of the team. So those are a variety of inputs that we can talk about. I'm going to talk about team diversity because I think it's kind of the most interesting for us here. So especially when the work that we're trying to do is complex, diversity matters a lot. You need people with different expertise in a team science project, right? So when multiple people with diverse specialized qualifications come together, they can do the diverse work that is required of the team. Diverse people tend to be individuals best suited to perform the individual work, and thus are necessary to perform the complex work that's required of the team. They also tend to have a wide set of contexts from which to draw resources. The pictures on the bottom just show the difference between a kind of a closed network and an open network. When you've got people who all come from the same kind of backgrounds and disciplines and have the same skill sets, they often have a much more closed network and many fewer opportunities to build on different sorts of contexts. People who have diverse skills and backgrounds and expertise tend to have a much broader set of networks collectively, which is also very valuable for a team and what they do. So you want to select the right team members because you're looking for the right level of diversity. More complex work requires more specialized skills, so you may need more people and more diversity in order to accomplish that. You need people with the right training and background, and then you need to give them clear roles that are sufficiently differentiated so that they can do their work. At the same time, that group should be as small as possible, because the more people with the more diversity and different expertise and backgrounds and such make the work of communication and integrating much harder. So the right level of diversity, recognizing that smaller is better. And it's also important to recognize that because you're bringing together very diverse people and expertise and skills, you may want to pay attention to their interpersonal ability as well. So if you have a choice of bringing people together and can choose somebody who is a bit more extroverted, a bit more interested in working and learning across backgrounds, that can be very advantageous in a group. So that's a bit about diversity on the team. Various mediators are also important. Once you take those inputs, how the group is led will really matter in terms of the group's ability to manage that diversity, manage its complexity and size, etc. Coordination within and between groups is also an important, will also have important impacts on the ability of the group to function. Various forms of cognition and affect and motivation. And I'm going to get to a couple of those as well, but I'm going to start with leadership. Wait a minute, hold on just a second. I guess I'm not going to start with leadership here. I'm going to, leadership will come up next. I'm going to start with social identity. So let me mention the forms of cognition that make a difference in terms of how teams operate include the extent to which the mental model of the people in the group about what it is the group needs to accomplish is shared will make a difference. How much their knowledge is shared, how much shared understanding they have of the goals, and how much distance there is between the group and the goal. So how far away are they from accomplishing the goal? All of those things are forms of cognition that will make a difference. And then with respect to affect and motivation, and as I said, again, I'm going to start with social identity, but things like people's goal commitment, the cohesiveness of the people on the team, which is obviously something that you can create, people's collective efficacy, how as a group do we feel about our ability to get this work done, and having mutual trust. All of those things will be impactful on the ability of the group to take its inputs and get the work done. And then psychological safety, which I'll spend some more time on too. So let me hop to social identification, and I'm going to take individual and team identification separately. So these are things that really matter for the ability of teams to get work done when, especially when the work is complex. But the basic idea is that it's important for people to have individual identities. They come, especially when you're choosing diverse groups of people. I'm a team scientist. If I come to a team, I identify as someone who has expertise on a team. And that individual identification becomes stronger as the teams become diverse, because then people are looking to me to be the team expert. And so I need to identify as that person in order to bring that forward on a team. That individual identification can be problematic so it's good to know that people do that. It can be problematic in a team if somebody who has responsibility for bringing that expertise infers that other people see them differently than they see themselves. If somebody on the team or the group of people on the team don't see me as the team expert or don't recognize teamwork as important on the team, I get threatened as an individual team scientist. And I combat that by sort of seeking social validation. But when I don't get that social validation from the group, I sort of withdraw. So I hesitate from sharing information, and I get defensive about the ideas that I do share. And just thinking about, for example, of a group that I'm working with, a team science group I'm working with, people who describe themselves as kind of anthropologists and really defensive about the importance of kind of anthropological skills on the team, had a really tough time given finding social validation on the team, and it set us backwards in our effort to do team science for quite some time. So that when that happens, it's problematic, because when you've got the diverse teams that you need to do team science, you need people's kind of unique capacity, unique ideas in order to benefit the group as best you can. And so if people aren't being socially validated, they're not bringing their best selves and their best ideas to the group. So that's kind of one way of thinking about the importance of individual identification. And it's something really important if you are leading a team that you need to think about. Second thing with respect to social identification is team identification. So beyond people's identifying kind of individually with kind of what they come from, we want people to identify with the team, and understanding team identification is important for your ability to lead these team science projects. So generally, team identification is a really positive thing. You want people to feel a part of the team. You want people to feel like the team is efficacious in being able to accomplish what it's trying to accomplish. Team identification is really helpful if you are trying to resolve a conflict, if you are dealing with rivalries, with organizations or groups outside your team, and resolving various threats. People give others the benefit of the doubt when they identify with that team, others kind of within the team. If there are subgroups within the team, and typically within a team science group, we think of it as a team of teams. So there are always subgroups in the team. If there is identification with that subgroup that is greater than the identification with the larger group, that can be problematic because you can create intergroup rivalry. The other way in which team identification can be problematic, and I should have included it in here, is kind of if there's too much team identification and you get too much groupthink. But in the context of team science projects, when there's so much diversity, it's really the case. What you're more often to find is this subgroup identification that becomes problematic because it creates intergroup rivalry within the teams of people that you need very desperately to work together. So monitoring what's going on with both individual identification and team identification can be really helpful for managing what's going on your team. And often when you find that it's not working, things are not working well, you can look to team identification. So I knew I wanted to talk about leadership. It's critically one of the most important things that leaders. So leaders are one of the most important actors in a group. One of the most important things that leaders do is to shape the group culture, and to do things like monitoring individual and team identity. When I say leaders, I just want to caveat that I don't mean the person in charge. I mean anybody who is acting as a leader within a group. Everybody can do their part in shaping a group culture. So first, just to define it for folks, there are also, you've got an array here. You can pick your favorite type. Deal and Kennedy talked about the way we do things around here. I tend to like that one a lot. Dear colleague, Ed Schein, who recently passed away and was a huge supporter of Stanford medicine and Stanford healthcare, he talked about a pattern of automatic assumptions that are unconsciously held and taken for granted. But the idea is it's this accumulated shared learning in an organization. It's what you feel when you walk into a space and when you're participating in a group. It's sort of what people do when they're not looking. I think people have your own sense of what culture is, but it is enormously important when you're trying to do work in teams. This comes from Ed and Peter's work on culture. I had a figure that I created too, but I just think this one is so superior to anything I've ever seen because it presents a visceral image and understanding of how culture gets shaped in an organization and what leaders do to shape it. So again, anybody being a leader can create that wave that washes over the shore. That is kind of the existing culture. Existing culture creates these headwinds that create the backlash. But over time, in the same way that the wave shapes the sand, acts of leadership shape the organizational culture, and you see change over time. So knowing and recognizing that you all have a part in shaping the culture of the team in ways that may affect getting it done can be very helpful. Just wanted to give an example of what that looks like. I teach a famous case about the Boeing 737 MAX, which always makes me so incredibly frustrated when I bring it up. But there was this massive organizational cultural change that happened at Boeing when Boeing merged with McDonnell Douglas, and the McDonnell Douglas leaders actually took over the merged organization. Ultimately, they moved the headquarters from Washington State to Chicago. So the administrative headquarters were actually separate from what was going on the engineering side. So the new executives had, financial targets first and foremost in their minds, and they really downplayed the role and the expertise and the interests of the engineers, who were all about kind of safety first and engineering forms of innovation. It created a massive cultural shift that set up safety and financial performance as conflicting priorities. And we work really hard in healthcare settings to suggest that these two things can go hand in hand and that safety needs to be a priority. But that was what I would suggest is the underlying cause of the two disastrous crashes of the Lion Air flight and then the Ethiopian Air flight that happened. So organizational culture is a really big deal, and it's a big deal in our institutions, and it's a big deal in team science projects as well. The last of the mediators that I wanted to highlight is psychological safety. It is a key cultural attribute. So think of it, sometimes you can think of it as part of the organizational culture. You want to have a psychologically safe culture. You want to have a psychological safety oriented culture within the environment. It is, I think, what it sounds like it is. It is kind of believing within a group that the environment is safe for taking interpersonal risk. You have more here stemming from Amy Edmondson, but it is the ability and even the obligation to be candid. There's a whole list of things that it is not. It is not always being always being right, but it is importantly the ability to say what you think is important to say, and for people to listen to what that is. So it supports organizational learning and improves performance, and it is importantly impacted by team and organizational characteristics. So I'm going to unpack it a little bit further. I said that it was creating an environment for interpersonal risk-taking. One of the key things to understand is that it's not a natural thing that happens in our organizations or in our groups, because we have all sorts of barriers to doing it. But the basic idea is that nobody wants to look bad. People don't take these interpersonal risks because you don't want to look all these things on the left: ignorant, incompetent, intrusive, and negative. And so the way to deal with that is to manage people's impression of you by not asking questions, not admitting weakness or mistakes, don't offer ideas, and don't critique the status quo. All of those things are really problematic when what you're trying to do is bring out the diversity that we talked about initially, especially in this team science environment where you need integrated multidisciplinary work to be successful. So the consequences of holding back, especially in these team science projects, are various. In the context of healthcare organizations, they include, safety issues, resource waste, business failures, and certainly personal regret. If you can, imagine the context of that Boeing 737 MAX and all the other major disasters, and even the minor disasters that we have in our own healthcare organizations. Regret's a big deal. Okay, so, as I said, here's the list on the right of the things that psychological safety is not. So it's not being nice, it's not job security, it's not a guarantee that your ideas are going to be applauded or be implemented, and the like. Not license to whine, not freedom from conflict, not permission to slack off, and it's not independently in and of itself the goal. It is all these things on the left: the ability to do all those things that impression management tells you that you shouldn't be doing. You need a super psychologically safe space for doing it. And I hope that people have heard of this book, The Fearless Organization, have heard of Amy Edmondson. If you have not, this is a great introduction to her work. But I highly recommend understanding this construct of psychological safety. One of the things I just wanted to point out is that often people talk about, well, if we create this great psychologically safe space, then we're not really focusing on performance. And honestly, I hear that when I talk to people in healthcare organizations, and it is incredibly frustrating to appreciate that people still believe that these are contradictory ideas. But where you want to be is in this upper right-hand corner, where learning is what you're after. So you want psychological safety to be high, and you want performance standards to be high. And when you have both of those things, you can do your best learning. You get you achieve high performance standards if you are in a psychologically safe space, because you are encouraging people to share those best ideas, to argue about those ideas, and to really hold each other accountable to high performance. And so you end up coming out with more learning. Lots of evidence, and this is just a real partial list, and I'm sure it could be better updated, but psychological safety, if I haven't convinced you already, is associated with lots of things that we think are really important. Both kind of process-oriented things like teamwork and implementation, timeliness, personal issues like exhaustion and burnout, at feeling heard, feeling burnout, and as well as with performance outcomes like morbidity and mortality. And there's a long list of studies kind of backing up each of these. They're just some examples of them. So psychological safety is really important. It's particularly important when you have diverse teams. So I want to share this image and just give you an opportunity to digest it a little bit. So on the left-hand side is around kind of the value of the kind of performance, and on the other axis is how homogeneous or heterogeneous the team is. So all the way out on the right, you've got highly diverse teams, and there you can see that the performance is kind of tends to be all over the place. Where you have the breakthrough performance when you've got diverse teams is when you have psychological safety. So on average, what this graph is showing us is that diverse teams underperform homogeneous teams. That's what the line is showing us. Overcoming those challenges requires a psychologically safe environment and a learning-oriented environment. So really important, really important concept. Just a word on kind of what kinds of leadership promotes psychological safety. Amy Edmondson, again, she talks about kind of 3 opportunities: framing the work, inviting engagement, and responding productively to what people say. So, and this is, anyone as leader can do this when you're trying to frame the work, but you can frame the work as a learning opportunity. Say, we haven't done this before. We haven't done it this way before. We need new ideas. We need your ideas. There is a famous story about Reed Hastings at Netflix, who talks about withholding your opinion as being something that is disloyal. So really hunkering down on this framing notion of saying, you've got to bring your whole self and all your ideas, including your criticisms, to the work that we're going to do, so we get the best out of the group. And then kind of during the work, inviting engagement. So leaders can do that by sharing your own mistakes and making people feel comfortable in doing it, but also by, and I think most importantly, by asking good questions, and then by insisting on people dissenting around it. I talked about the importance of team identification. If people are identifying with the team too much, you've really got to insist on people's dissent. And Alfred P. Sloan from GM, that's his famous line down at the bottom: if we're in complete agreement, I propose we postpone to give ourselves time to develop disagreement and to gain some understanding of what this decision is all about. So that's sort of an extreme example, but like the importance of recognizing that that you need people's input. If you have an important question before you, you need that input, and sometimes you need to ask the questions and insist on people thinking hard and coming up with contradictory suggestions. And then the third aspect is just responding productively, both sort of being appreciative, being humane, but also being forward-looking. So always you can say, thank you for bringing this up, and appreciating that people have done it. But it's not the same thing as agreeing to everything that everybody says. You actually want as much input as possible. And if you do that, then a lot of the input that you get is not going to be the way you go forward. Maybe it influences what you decide, but a lot of it is going to be left on the cutting floor. So you need to be super hard on the problems while you're being soft on the people in order to come up with the best solutions. So that's the general notion of psychological safety. You can ask yourself every day, in order to frame the work, invite engagement, and respond productively? What have I said to reinforce the message? That anybody's voice could make a difference here, that things will go wrong, that fast recovery and learning are what matter. You invite engagement by asking yourself, how many good questions have I asked? And you respond productively by saying, when I got that bad news, what did I do? Sometimes if you can't always be perfect when you're responding. So sometimes you have to apologize because you recognize you didn't respond well to bad news. You got to circle back with people to ensure that they continue to feel safe. They understand that you aren't necessarily perfect. Then this framework we put together just to show how these things interact and the attributes of leaders that can create a psychologically safe space interact. So psychological safety is there in the middle, and it requires, we say, a combination of humility, curiosity, and empathy in order to ask questions like, how strongly did you desire to understand and learn? You can see the attributes of humility and empathy coming out there. How inclined are you to listen? You need to be both empathic, so you can actually listen and appreciate what other people have to say, but you also have to be curious to learn from them. And then the other important question, how able are you to acknowledge gaps? So there, this combination of humility and curiosity, because you need to be able to be humble enough to say that you have gaps, and then you need to be curious enough to invite other people in to help you fill them. So with respect to these mediators, organizational culture is a precious resource that powerfully directs actions within groups and organizations, and it requires tending to maintain the shores of the sand can get influenced by other people, if not by you. And then psychologically safe cultures that are focused on systems rather than individuals, and problem finding more than problem solving, and learning from near misses can protect against errors and can invite contribution to team science efforts. So that's sort of mediators. And I can't actually see if there's a comment in the chat that somebody has a question for. Katie, if you can monitor for me.
I am. Yeah. No questions. Just a comment that a just culture equals psychological safety plus accountability.
Yes, we can talk a little bit about a just culture. It is one of the very helpful concepts out there to help guide organizations. Just culture around accountability often means letting people know that what is acceptable behavior and what is not acceptable behavior within an organization, so that people can see when actions are taken, why they're taken, and that there is kind of transparency around that. So would welcome if somebody who put that in the chat wanted to comment a little bit further about the importance of just culture.
Hi, my name is Maria Dean, and I work at the VA in Palo Alto, and I put the comment in there about just culture. And I want to preface it and say that I think it's something that's it feels slightly amorphous at this point for me, because I think we're struggling to think about how do we implement just culture? How do we really work with staff so that everyone understands that intersection of psychological safety and accountability? And how, if there is if, for example, a staff member has a near miss or a, just makes a mistake, right? A human error, how do we deal with that as a facility? And how do we make sure that supervisors understand that everyone will be making human errors? And how do we make sure we have systems in place and make sure we treat this as a systems error and not a person problem? Or a personnel problem.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for saying it. So, organizationally, when we're trying to create, so a little bit aside from team science aspects, when we're trying to create psychologically safe environments that are also safe for patients and safe for personnel who are working within them, we are focused on trying to resolve problems that are happening at a systems level, acknowledging that most of the problems do have some kind of root cause that are systems related. So one of the concepts that might be helpful is one that's called like red rules, which lay out what are the things that for which individuals will be accountable for, versus the otherwise and fundamental assumption that that systems are fundamentally the cause. And so that tends to help people kind of understand what those boundaries are, and enables people to maintain a psychologically safe environment that also feels just. So happy to talk some more about it, but thank you for suggesting it. The last bit I wanted to talk about, and I am happy if there are other questions, Katie, just keep interrupting me if you would. I wanted to talk a little bit about this team effectiveness aspect, because teams are really important, and we're talking about team science and the importance of doing work together as teams. I want to acknowledge that we're drawn to teams, and they can do all sorts of really wonderful things because you bring more resources together. You've got the diversity of resources, you've got more flexibility in deploying them, you've got opportunities for collective learning, and you've got the potential for synergy. But to acknowledge that most teams underperform compared to the collection of individuals within them, this notion of the whole being less than the sum of the parts. And that's because we're working in environments that are really hard. I mentioned when I showed you that crew team at the beginning, how we don't meet the definition of a traditional team, typically when we're working together. And that's because in healthcare, we face a whole bunch of boundaries, and it just makes teamwork really a lot harder. So we're often distanced from one another, increasingly after COVID. And those geographical distances across sites, or even different floors on a site, but across the university, leads to misunderstanding, coordination difficulties, just make it harder to interact. Status differences abound within healthcare settings from professional organizational hierarchies. So that causes us to kind of defer to people in authority. I tried to make really clear that I think leadership comes from everybody, but when you've got a clear hierarchy, we still tend to look toward the person at the highest level of authority to lead. And that just sometimes isn't, that person doesn't necessarily have the right answer. And so that deference also leads to this lack of speaking up. Knowledge boundaries from professional backgrounds and organizational affiliations, we set that up when we do team science, but it also means that we are more likely to face differing assumptions, different norms, incentives, and this in-group favoritism that happens when talked about those subgroup rivalries. And then last boundary is a work-life kind of boundary, which is a new one thanks to COVID, but people have personal needs that are impacting work increasingly, and that we are increasingly aware of them, and that creates issues related to scheduling and staffing and fairness sorts of issues. So, achieving those effective outcomes under these circumstances is much harder. And I just wanted to kind of iterate again. We're talking about 3 versions of effective teams: producing the output that's useful to the group that is seeking it, also being more competent as a team over time, and also fostering the team members' personal learning and growth. So that's a recap. And then just super briefly, the way to accomplish team effectiveness basically boils down to how are we designing our team and what sorts of processes that we're using to address the work of the team. So when we think about team design, making sure that the team has a shared goal, understands the goal, even if you've got subgroups on the team, that everybody feels drawn to the overarching goal of the team, how it's composed. We've talked about already making sure that you've got enough diversity, but not too much. Also giving the team a set of metrics that will enable them to understand when they are progressing and when they are achieving what they do, and then creating opportunities to reward people, both as individuals for their performance, but importantly for them as a group. Then also very briefly, with respect to team processes, there are so many to think about, ways to ensure that information gets shared adequately. The more people you have on the team, and the more sub-teams you have on a team, the harder it is to adequately share information. So this needs to happen this needs to happen electronically, but can't only happen electronically for it to be effective. Happy to talk more about that. Decision-making, helping people see whether the decision is an important one that requires all sorts of input. So you really get to the best decision in the way that Alfred P. Sloan was trying to encourage. Or is this a decision where any decision would really do? The important thing is that we just everybody gets on board and we implement it super well. And so that's the kind of decision where consensus is much more important. Conflict management is another kind of huge can of worms, but a hugely important process for teamwork and team effectiveness. And then learning processes. How are we making sure that we have the psychologically safe space, but that we are learning from all of the good information that people are providing because we have a psychologically safe space. And then just recognizing that that lack of team identification and lack of team trust, what we started out talking about in this conversation, can undermine any of these processes. So are super important for seeking to achieve that. So just here to summarize 3 quickie things. Teams matter deeply where the work is interdependent. Teamwork amid boundaries makes it much harder to build the team identification and team trust that we need to make it happen, and that leaders' ability to accomplish team effectiveness happens through a whole series of decisions around team design and team processes. So I'm eager to, I covered a ton of things that we could talk about. I teach whole courses and multiple courses that try and get at those kinds of issues, but I wanted people to know the array of things that matter for teamwork and working in teams, and happy to dive into any of them.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And if we could come off mute or just wave our hands.
Show your faces.
Fantastic presentation. Please unmute yourself if you, and there's still more applause. That's awesome. Please unmute yourself if you would like, and you can put stuff in the chat as well. Craig, yes, go ahead.
Sarah, as usual, a superb performance. My question to you regards the technology we were on right now, and that is, distant conversations. Is in the balance, is technology helpful in creating the right processes, or does it present a challenge? And if it's a challenge, what are your tips or techniques for overcoming the challenges that things like Zoom present to building teams?
Yeah, so excellent question. And I've been studying this pretty extensively and trying to figure out how to integrate care within healthcare settings. And one of the general rules that we find is that the answer is yes, right? Yes, it's helpful. Yes, it's problematic. And the reason that's the case is because technology alone is not sufficient. So generally what we're finding is that these functional solutions, technology being one of them, Zoom being one of the technological solutions, is insufficient in the absence of social processes for making sure that they work sufficiently. So you can imagine an electronic medical record that is helpful functionally, but unless you've got someone who is monitoring information on an electronic record to kind of bring information together and or to monitor that information that gets in there is actually put to use, you can have failures. With respect to Zoom, I'd say probably incredibly. We're still on it, so I think by virtue of being on it, we're finding it useful, but I would suggest that it is another one of those examples where technology alone risks a loss from the more social processes. So I'm talking here a lot of people are off camera. I don't know how much that information is transmitting. I'd be able to do that much better if I was, standing with somebody, you can say, so one of my research assistants is outside there. Kate, I'm going to hang up on this call. I'm going to go out and say, how did that go? And she's going to tell me. And that's a whole different level of understanding and appreciation. So we need to find ways of leveraging the technologies that we have, but also checking in in a more personal way to ensure that the information that we are trying to share is effectively being shared. I wouldn't ascribe to it a sufficiency for information sharing and communication.
Fantastic, Sarah. Thank you, Craig, for the question. I'm going to take a facilitator's my facilitator card here and ask Sarah about. So I was reading the book Quiet a while ago. That's about introverts, and I was just really curious, thinking about the diversity of teams, and your recommendation to look for people who are going to be reaching out to other folks, and where introverts, especially in the research world, can best fit in to that. Just wanted to flag that and hear what you had to say.
So I don't actually think so. It's not so much introvert versus extrovert. It's people who have the sort of curiosity and openness to learning across the disciplines. So sometimes that's associated with extroverts, but not always. So some people can be really thoughtful and shy, but still great listeners, and able to integrate. So it's not necessarily aligned with introversion or extroversion, but I think you do want to look for people with a curiosity, and you don't need to have. Not everybody needs to be of that type. Another way you can overcome some of those challenges across subgroups within teams is to specifically structure bridgers. So you can have individuals who are on two subgroups, and they perform that information transfer in a way that, if you've got a group of introverts who are less curious, you can have one person who is serving that bridging kind of role and overcome the challenge that way too.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, that curiosity piece seems like a great bridge. I think we have time for one more question. If somebody wants to, Allison, please.
Great presentation, Sarah. I had a question. You mentioned that it's important to monitor what's going on with group identification. Can you say a little more about like how you do that, and who in a group is responsible for that, or what persons are responsible for that?
Yeah, so I'd say everybody is responsible for that. You can monitor yourself. Like, am I attracted to the group? Am I pulling away from the group? Do I feel valued in the group? Do I not feel valued in the group, right? So those are the team and individual identification, but others can too. Are people like enthusiastic about showing up? If they're not, then you may have team identification sorts of problems. So it's really everybody's responsibility, and I would say leaders' responsibility. But if you see someone who needs more social validation within the group, you can kind of thank them for a contribution, or invite a contribution given their specific expertise, that sort of thing. If you are feeling a lack of team identification, you can remind people of their superordinate goal. You can identify kind of a group outside your group in order to build team identification and have a bit of a rivalry. Or you can kind of acknowledge the group for group performance. So people have more identification with the group when the group is doing well, typically. So there are lots of ways of doing it. And I never feel like it's never the best strategy. I shouldn't say never. It's rarely the best strategy to rely on kind of the one person who is in this position of authority to be the one to observe this. Sometimes somebody at a distance who can kind of have a bit of perspective can often see things that other people don't necessarily. So sometimes it comes from them, but I do think that everybody needs to feel some responsibility for making the group work.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thanks, everybody. Again, just a brief announcement as we wrap up. I was chatting with someone about the read.ai meeting notes, and just want to remind people it's not a problem in this conversation because we weren't discussing actual patients, but that absolutely needs not to be used because it's not HIPAA compliant for meetings that include, because anything that goes into AI or Chat GPT that's not HIPAA compliant. Anyway, just a brief PSA there. And thank you so much, Sarah, for the conversation.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. It's I love to be able to share some of this information. I think it's super important in healthcare settings, and I don't think we often take a step back and think about it enough.
And this recording will be up on the SMCI website shortly. Not sure what shortly looks like with Thanksgiving coming, and we'll see you all on the 28th of November.